Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. Aesthetics versus functionality. It's great to be here with you in Sweden. I've never been to Sweden before, so it's really exciting. So today we're going to talk about really, I think, an issue, perhaps I should say, that we suffer a lot from, which is functional design versus aesthetic design. So I think a lot of times in the FileMaker world, we tend towards the functional design. Actually, it's not just the FileMaker world, I should say. It's kind of everywhere. And how do we bring a bit more aesthetics into our design overall? So that's what we're going to talk about today. First, a little bit about me. I'm from Toronto, Ontario, in Canada. So our weather is about what it is here in Sweden. It's almost about the same. And actually, I took this photo myself. My husband and I bought a sailboat about a year ago or so. And so we've been sailing in the lake. And it's really exciting because I've lived my whole life in Toronto. I'm not one of these people who's like a world traveler, except for this year. Normally, I think I live 2 or 3 kilometers from where I grew up. And I have more or less ignored the lake my whole life. So coming and opening a whole new world from the water is really amazing. So I've spoken numerous times at different events on the topic of UI and UX design. So previous DevCons in Italy with FileMaker Guru, Montreal with CQDF, and I'll actually also be at this year's Engage, where I'll be running a longer version of the UI design training that I did here the other day. So at Engage U, we did a shorter 3-hour. At Engage in Austin, I'll be doing a full 1-day training of similar topics, but more practical time for you to actually apply things. And it'll be the day after Engage. So keep your eye out for that if you're interested in coming to that. I'm also the founder of fmdesignuniversity.com, and I have a number of free resources, basically articles and resources about FileMaker design topics to help you make sense of UI UX design. I know it's challenging for a lot of people, especially if you're not used to design, but it's totally learnable. It's like any skill. At the beginning, you sort of start off following rules and following checklists and things like that. And then as you practice it, it becomes a little bit easier and easier to go. So it's really a matter of practicing. But it's totally learnable. And my signature course is the UX Design Workshop. It's an 8-module on-demand UX design course. I started it off doing 8 weeks, and that's because you need a little bit of time to do homework and learn the concepts and stuff. But you can actually do it on your own schedule as well if you'd like. It's really just 8 modules. And I also do team training, so I've trained a lot of teams, Keologic, Goya, Keynaid, who you might know, and a few others as well. So everybody from that organization takes the course as a group once a week. And someone earlier asked me for some examples of design in FileMaker. So these are all FileMaker solutions that I've created for different clients. And I like the fact that it really just looks like software. It doesn't necessarily look like a FileMaker solution. And so that's what I sort of strive for, and that's what I hope that you will all be able to eventually do for your clients as well. And I have a theme file. This is something I made recently. It's basically a fully functioning file that you can use in any way that you want. I did all the scripting and everything. I struggled for a long time about how to actually deliver a theme. So I thought, well, I could just give you something just with a bunch of objects in it. And then the problem is, well, how do I use these objects? What is the context, and how do I make new screens from it? It doesn't really help you that much. So I thought, all right, I'll just make a small app that will show you how these things are all go together, and then you can adapt that for your own purposes, or you can just see how I did it. All of my naming conventions that I use for themes, for scripting, and everything is there. And Hans has been using this as his example file, and so it's been getting a lot of love lately, which is wonderful. But please go and check it out. And also, I have a podcast with Matt Odell, who used to work for Claris back in the day. He's a user experience designer at another company now. And so we just chat about design. And I have a new season coming out soon. As soon as my tour of the conferences is done, I'll get back to bring some more episodes of the podcast. Okay, so as I said, my husband and I own a sailboat. It's a very vintage sailboat, so it's really good for us because we are very, very new boat owners. We've never owned a boat before. And my husband's been sailing on a friend's boat for a few years, but it's all very, very new to us. And so I actually wanted to use the sailboat as my metaphor today for design, because even though it's a very old boat and it wouldn't be the best boat for everybody, it's really good for us because we're new. It's 1974. It already has a lot of scratches, right? So if we bang it into the dock when we're landing it or something else happens, it's also because it's old, there's not very much that's mechanized on it. So it's all very like manual ropes and things. As you get more, fancy boats, everything is more mechanized, but then there's more things that can go wrong. You can do things, you can make more mistakes. So this is our friend Alan's boat. Alan and his wife Lily. They're a wonderful, really nice couple, and we go on cruises with the group, with the whole club, and everybody brings their boat and goes on a cruise. And they have a wonderful, beautiful boat, and it's really fancy inside. They could take it and spend the whole vacation for 1 week. She had a full kitchen and everything. But I would be really worried about if I was my boat of scratching it or doing something. And so it's really perfect for them. But for me, I was like, no, it's too much for me. And then there's also this kind of boat. Anybody here from Amsterdam? No? Okay. Well, this is an actual flotilla. It's like every year, I think they do these amphibious cars. And they go on the canals. And I think this year was the last year because Amsterdam, or I guess the Netherlands, said, well, you need to have everything to must be environmentally friendly, so we won't allow gas-powered motors in the canals anymore. So this was the last time they were doing it, at least until they convert over to electric. But the point is that this is a special type of person who wants this kind of boat, right? They're looking for novelty, for people to look at them and laugh and have fun and obviously be with other people who have similar cars. So what's my point? My point is that you really need to understand what the person is going to be using it for. Whatever you're doing, it's different people are going to be using it for different things. So it's the same thing when we have an app, right? If we have somebody if you're designing, let's say, for children or for engineers, those are two very different groups of people. They have different needs and they have different goals with their app, right? So you're going to want to really kind of understand what the primary objectives are for the people who are going to be using whatever it is that you're building. And it's also about aligning the aesthetics with that as well, right? So there's an aesthetic difference between these three boats as well. And so the aesthetics, to some extent, follow the function of it. Okay, so for today, we're going to talk about a few things. So why both aesthetics and functionality are both really important in your designs. Why you need to understand your users. We talked a little bit about that already. And how people perceive is actually going to affect the usability of your app. And finally, why really at the end of the day, simplicity is really the key to achieving a balanced UI between aesthetics and functionality. And I'm sorry about my voice. I'm a little bit sick, so my voice is not the best today, so I apologize in advance. Okay, so the functional approach. So the functional approach is a little bit like this barge, right? It's very effective. It's very useful. It works. It can carry 20 containers from A to B, but it's not very nice to look at, right? And some products that's okay, right? Some products are primarily functional and the aesthetics aren't as important. And so if you're designing for yourself, we frequently see this kind of thing. So you know how to use the tool, nobody else needs to know how to use it, and then you kind of learn, so you don't really put in a lot of clues or any other things that to make it easy to understand. But I would ask you, how many of you, because I'm speaking from personal experience here, have gone back to something like this after a year or 6 months and you don't remember what it's supposed to do, right? That's me. And so, yeah, so even when you're designing for yourself, sometimes this approach can be a little bit limiting. And also the other thing to think about is when you're designing for other people, this approach can alienate some people because they just don't understand. There's really not enough clues here about how it's supposed to be used in order to actually make it useful. Okay, so we're going to just look at some examples of very functional things that maybe don't work so well. So this is the Microsoft Band. It's from 2014. And it only lasted about 2 years for Microsoft. And some people said it looked like a prison band. So, like a tracker to keep track of you. And it was basically a fitness tracker, essentially. And it would sync up with like the Windows Phone, and we know how well the Windows Phone did. And it would really kind of keep track of your sleep and stuff, but it was actually uncomfortable to sleep with. So then it wasn't so useful for sleeping either. And it was about, I think, $200. It didn't work with Bluetooth. And it didn't sell well in the end, right? It ended up being an overpriced, uncomfortable thing. So it was really suffering from not matching what people needed to use it for very well. So even though it was functional, it did what it was supposed to do. Nobody really used it that much, and eventually it didn't work. So this is kind of a bit of a version of that, right? It's sometimes we call this the programmer's interface, like I was saying when you design for yourself, right? And this kind of happens when you're designing, when you're building it as you're designing it as you're building it. So something occurs to you and you're like, oh, I'll put that on there. And then something else occurs to you, well, I'll just find a spot and I'll stick that on there. And then you just sort of go and it just evolves organically. There's no kind of like pre-planning. And so this is kind of common when you're designing for yourself because you're doing it as you go. But you're not the user in most cases. Most of us, I would say, are designing for other people. Yes, show of hands, who's designing for other people? Okay, so the vast majority of you are for designing people who are not you. So just keep that in mind, it's really important. And here's the annotated version of this, which if you have to try to explain it, right, it's a problem, right? So we should be able to see at a glance, at least understand what it is. Here's another one, another example. And I know I'm picking on Windows, Mac has this problem too, but really there's nothing that kind of tells us how are we supposed to use this. And this is called, to some extent, what goes into this, we call it information architecture. So there's the architecture, the structure of the app, but then there's also this information architecture, which are all the visual clues that help us understand how the elements of the app go together. What's a parent, what's a child, what's important, what's related information, all of that kind of stuff. And if you think about, let's say, a book, you know, if you go a book, there's many, many books out there, but if you look at the cover of a book, you can tell what's the title already. They don't have to put title, colon, and then put the title, right? It's the largest thing on the book, and then you know that's the name, oh, that's the author, right? So that's the information architecture. We're looking for that kind of way of designing that people can tell at a glance what they're looking at. This one here has a problem because it also has like, where it says hosts in the upper left, there's a boundary that looks like that's linking those things together, but actually the two checkboxes relate to the things to the right. So there's sort of like conflicting clues about how to use this and what it is. So this could be done much better just by changing the way that the information architecture is exposed on the interface. So besides a lack of visible AI, another problem is allowing the client to decide what should and shouldn't be on the screen. Does anybody do that? Like they have their client say, oh, can you put this here and just stick it in that spot? That's happened to me, right? And so I have a friend who likes to say, you're not a barista, right? You're not there to just take orders. You're really a consultant. You're there to meet their needs. So what you really want to do is ask them, well, what are you trying to accomplish? What is the purpose? And then you can find a way to make that happen. And I really try to steer clients away from telling me exactly where I should put something and what I should do, because then they're not really taking advantage of my expertise. They're really just sort of telling me what to do. And this is the redesigned version of this tool. So let's look at them side by side. Right? So you can see that there's some differences between these two. Now first, there's the size. Like obviously, screens have gotten bigger over time, right? So we have more space to work with. But other than that, it's exactly the same tool, but they did, with a larger screen size, they were able to provide more space. So there's more white space between everything. There's a little bit more space for this stuff. But it's better. It's not great. And then there's this also blank space where they're like, well, we just lined everything up and we have some space left over, so we're not going to really do anything with that. We'll just sort of leave it there, right? And so, yeah. So here's another functional interface. It's quite cluttered as well. That's another problem with some of these, is that there's just a lot on the screen. And so, yeah, that's a bit of an issue. And this one, has a little bit more. So you have 3 levels of buttons, which is kind of a visual hierarchy. At least you can sort of tell. There's a bit of grouping. There's some categories, but it's not aesthetic, right? It's still kind of a barge. And just so you know, I'm not always picking on Windows. Here's a Mac app, which is an SEO tool that I bought. And the thing about this is kind of just shows you have to already understand what SEO is, how to use it, how everything goes together. Because this interface does not tell you anything about that. It's just a bunch of functions, and you can choose what you want to do. And again, it's functional, it works. However, it is not very aesthetic, and so there's a lot that's put onto the user to know. Does anybody have problems with a client say, oh, I've got an interface like this, and it takes me like 6 months to train anybody new? Did that happen? Yeah, so it's fine if everybody, who's already using it continues using it, but anybody new comes in and says, I don't understand. I need help to understand this. So when they go to the other functional side, so now we were like functional bad, like not really great, kind of moving towards a place where we're still functional. So Google is very functional, but it's starting to be good functional. So this is the ultimate stripped down interface, really. It's just Google. So there's no wrong way to use this. Just one field, type in your search, click the button, right? So it's not super aesthetic, but it guides people to use it correctly, basically because there's no other way to use it. And they've tucked in some other functionality in the corners so that you can get from here to something a bit more complex. But at the start, you're just shown something very, very simple. There's another functional design, which is Craigslist. So nothing but plain blue links on the page. But despite this, you're starting to see the information architecture that I was talking about earlier, right? You've got, there's a bit of a grid. There's really clear groupings. There's category names that are, formatted differently from the content. So really, its simplicity here is the strength, right? And they've also had they've been around for a long time, so they've had time to do research to figure out what works and what they don't need. So they've taken away everything really that possible in order to do something. So this is just to say you don't have to be super fancy to be usable. You can be functional, but functional more like this as opposed to the things we saw earlier. Wikipedia is another one that's very functional, right? And it's also very consistent. So every Wikipedia page more or less follows a very similar pattern. If you're looking at the country, another country page, if you looked at the country page for Sweden, it would look very similar, right? And it's taking, even though it's very functional, it's taking this information architecture and making it very clear, make it easy for you to tell what the sections are. Here's another example of a very clear information architecture and visual hierarchy. You've got the strong groupings, really clear labels, a little bit of icons, and it's really that consistency and simplicity. So this is sort of a bit of a nicer barge, but it is sort of still a barge. Let's look at Amazon. So this is kind of like a good example where it's still on the functional side, but they're starting to use photography and images to bring some color in, some interest. If you took the images away, there wouldn't be a lot of color on this interface. All the color really comes from the imagery that they're using, but they have product images. But because it's Amazon, they're really trying to tempt you to buy, so there's like just a lot of information. There's still quite a bit on the page. And also, I don't know how often people go to the front page and look at Amazon. Maybe they go right from here to something else. So they're kind of prioritizing ways for you to kind of find something specific that you're looking for. And they are relying on volume. So they're really sort of trying to put as much in front of you as possible while still being still sort of being aesthetic. It's not quite as functional as Craigslist, right, where there's like no photography at all. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's talk about the aesthetic approach. So the aesthetic approach is, goods that are aesthetic tends to be luxury. So there's sort of this aura of luxury around sort of aesthetics. And it's partly because it's usually more difficult to build something that is really, very smoothly curved, or it requires more material science to figure out how to make something very, curved lines or very sleek. It often takes more labor to do that, right? There's a famous quote by Mark Twain, "I would have written you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so I wrote you a long one." So, if you want to make something really pared down, you have to spend time doing that, right? So basically, it looks more luxurious. But if you learn how to design, it doesn't take as much time as you think. So let's look at something. So we looked at functional bad. Let's look at aesthetic bad as well on the other side, right? So this is sometimes an argument that I hear, there's aesthetic things that don't work very well, and that is true. So this product here, does anybody have an idea of what it might be? I actually think it might be a conceptual product, but it's called Umi, and this is what it looks like. And I was really struggling to understand. So I'll tell you what the description is. It says, Umi redefines digital communication by transforming abstract emotions into tangible experiences, bridging the gap between digital interactions and human touch. And I still don't know what it is. I think it's like a messaging system, but it seems like every person needs to have one of these pods so you can, anyway, it was like there's way easier ways of doing this. And it's very beautiful though, but I have no idea. So it's not very useful. Here's another one which I really find fun. This is called the Juicero, and it was promising the world juice sold in a pouch. And so there was like frozen juice, which I guess, was picked and frozen very fresh in a pouch. And so they found a machine. They were selling a machine, and they got people to invest quite a lot of money into this at the beginning. It cost $700, and what it does is it squeezes the pouch to release the juice. And they decided to save money on engineering, that they wouldn't have any physical buttons on the actual device, right? It would be operated by your iPhone. So when you want to juice, you have to take out your phone, make sure the Wi-Fi is working, your phone is charged, open the app. I mean, it's a lot of trouble, right? It did not actually sell well. And it cost $700 US, by the way. And then people discovered that they could just squeeze the pouches by hand. So it's a really very sleek-looking appliance, very aesthetic, not super useful. Okay. And then this one was Apple, which was the 18-karat gold Apple Watch edition, and it costs $10,000 to $17,000 for a Generation 1 Apple Watch. Well, I mean, for $17,000, you can buy a Rolex, which will never, become obsolete in a year, right? I think Beyonce bought one, and there was a few. Maybe it was a bit like, I was talking to Andy about this yesterday, and he said, well, it's just sort of like an aspirational product. And when I was, my kids were young, you'd go into Baby Gap, they would have like a leather jacket for like a 1-year-old. It was like $500. It's not really meant to sell that particular item. It's more meant to sell everything else. So maybe that was the point. But the other thing is, if you compare it, just for fun, to compare it to the Apple, or sort of to the Microsoft Band, yeah, pretty much. So that's sort of like with the Apple Watch edition, it's sort of like you have this timeless design, gold, luxury, really expensive, combined with something that's going to go obsolete in a year, right? It was not really tailored to the audience very well in the end. They didn't make very many of them. This was a website that was an artist, and when I went to this, I was like not understanding how to actually get into the website. And it turns out that you click on the person's name, and then you get a second window that pops up that is the website. I was like, why? Why are we doing this? So it's very aesthetic, it's very sleek, right? Very minimalist. But then it's going to the part where you have no clues of how to use it. You really have to just sort of start clicking and by trial and error figure out how you're supposed to use it. So we want to avoid this problem as well. And this is one sent to me by my daughter. This is actually a clothing brand. And you can't see it because it's just a screenshot, but the thing in the middle actually rotates. And it's a video in the background as well. And all of the videos are slightly like sexually charged in some way. So it's really kind of disturbing. But what amazes me about this is that somebody had to program this. Like somebody had to make it spin. And also the clothes are awful. So yeah, but it's a look. It's definitely a look. All right, let's go to more realistics now. This is an app called the Time Shifter. And I used it when I was going to Australia to help me get acclimatized to the time change, because I was, it's 14 hours difference, I think. And when I opened it, I thought, oh, this is really nice. It's got a very subtle use of color and graphics, not too much information on every screen. It's very simple, clear, and consistent. And here's the sort of more detailed view. And it's just really, really lovely, right? The way that they've laid it out. They've just done a really great job. Now, it has the advantage of only doing really one thing, right? So it has that on its side. It's not a particularly complicated app, but it did a really nice job of presenting the information. And just to compare, this is British Airways' version of the same thing. And also, it's not optimized for mobile. It's just the web page, just shrunk down. So yeah, which one would you rather use? And then just for fun, this was another one that I saw, which was called Omio. And sorry, let me go back. This was Omio. This is a train getting the train thing. Oh, I'm sorry, I had two. This one here is called Visit a City. They're very similar, actually. So a little bit of use of images. And apparently the one thing to do in Mamo is the disgusting disgusting food museum. Is that what yeah. I don't know that I'll be going to that one, but yeah, interesting. But I really thought this was a nice, subtle use of photography, not too heavy on the graphics. lots of, very clear of what it is, things to do, some cards that show you some things that you might want to visit. Probably the canal sightseeing boat tour would be nicer than the disgusting food. But it's just very clear, and you can start to see the difference between this and the stuff we looked at earlier, right? It's a much more stripped down, less information on every screen. It's more categorized in group. It's really starting to use that information architecture we talked about. So then Ulysses app is a writing app. So this is sort of on the functional aesthetic. Sorry, it's more functional than aesthetic, but it's still aesthetic in that it's very clean. Like it's not sort of so stark. And they're, again, using very subtle clues and the very clean organization. Really, that's what it's about, is kind of like stripping away what's not required or figuring out what should be there, what should not be there, and really focusing on the most important information. This is QuickBooks, which is, again, we're starting to get this sort of balance. So QuickBooks is obviously very functional. I like it because accounting has a lot of information, which is similar to FileMaker solutions. A lot of us are trying to figure out how do we manage all this volume of information, right? So accounting has that, which is like tons and tons of data. And just for fun, it's interesting to see what it used to look like. So this is QuickBooks from the past, and then this is QuickBooks now. They kept a lot of the same elements, right? So there's still the color. They changed them a little bit. What else? They made much more space for each item. So because there's more space for the table data, they're able to take away that zebra striping. Because when everything is really close together and there's no differentiation, it's really easy for your eye to go down to the next item on the line. So they had to add the zebra striping in order to save space. And they realized, well, if we just put everything a little bit further apart, yes, you have to scroll a little bit more to view the table, but it's much, much easier to understand what's there, right? And so it's just making it what's important, give it more space to stand out. And then I wanted to show you Apple. And this is kind of a little bit of a contrast to the Amazon page, right? It's kind of similar in that they have a bunch of products that they want to sell you, but we're seeing this luxury effect, which is not as much, right? They're kind of really paring down and focusing on a few key things that they would like you to see, and they've done really beautiful photographs for those. And of course, Apple's more expensive, right? Amazon is really based on volume, like a lot of small things, and so they're putting more on that page, whereas Apple is doing this luxury thing where we're only going to show you 3 or 4 really important things, and then as you move down the page, you're going to get more cards for other things that are not as expensive, right? Okay, so how do we actually do this? We mentioned a few times simplicity, right? But how do you achieve simplicity? A lot of times we have all this information and the client wants everything on the page, and so you have to do some sort of exercise to sort out the important stuff from the not so important stuff. And you don't want to sacrifice functionality for the sake of aesthetics, but you also, people do respond more positively to attractive interfaces than functional ones. So you want to make your UI as attractive as you can, but in order to simplify your design, really you need to do user research. That's really the only way to understand what's truly important, what has to be there, and what can be kind of moved somewhere else. And the way that you do that is research. So you interview people, talk to as many people as you can, not just the person who hired you, but also some of the people doing the jobs that you're being asked to do, to design for. And also, don't ask them to just tell you about their job. See if they'll show you, because sometimes people, for yourself, you're using some sort of software, and you're kind of doing it by memory or by even muscle memory. If you've ever driven somewhere and you drive to work and you have like no memory of how you got there, you just know that you safely got yourself to your workplace. That same thing happens with software, right? People will just click, 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 and then you say, well, what did you click on? And they have no idea, because it was just sort of like, it was done very quickly. And people get really acclimatized to terrible interfaces sometimes. Sometimes actually it's a problem. People like their terrible interfaces. They sort of feel a little bit attached to them, and trying to improve and give them something new just because it's different, they sometimes resist that. Or sometimes I almost feel like it's a point of pride, right? Oh, there's this horrible, like really complicated, but I know how to use it. You're like, but it could be simpler. But no, I want to be special. So anyway, ask people to show you, because then you'll see things that you otherwise might not see if they just talked about it. And also, this is something that I really talk about a lot in my UX design course, is to do wireframes of your design before you start developing. So we talked about the programmer's interface, where you build as you go, right? If something occurs to you, you find a place for it and you just stick it on the layout. I actually think that that's fine for personal projects. When you're designing for other people, development takes a lot of time. And so if you can work things out ahead of time and have those conversations, figure out the process, then you don't have those problems later when the developer comes to you and says, "Oh, I just discovered this thing, and we know before, and what do we do?" And then someone's already invested time into actually building that. So if you can make wireframes, Figma or XD, Adobe XD are two programs. If you can know FileMaker, you can very easily pick these up. They're not very difficult to learn. And it saves a lot of time to work out things in advance. Even if it's not super close to the final product, at least if you have screens, or like Balsamic is something that we can do kind of like a type of sketch with. Try to figure that out ahead of time so that you're not left developing something and then running into problems later. And then also the information architecture that I talked about. So a lot of people are in danger of ending up with a barge. So if you don't want to have a barge, then think about, how am I going to communicate to the user what's the most important things? So things that are larger are more important. Things that are higher on the page are usually more general, and it kind of works to more specific. Things that are different. And I talk about a menu, for example. There's thousands and millions of restaurants perhaps, but we don't have to ask them, well, how to use this menu every time, right? You can go and but there's still a lot of variety, right? Every menu is a little bit different, but we're still not confused about how to use it. So yes, sometimes we're in fields that are very, very complex, and so the user needs to have an understanding of the domain. It's not like they're going to learn everything they need to know from the user interface, but the interface is going to map on to their process fairly well in terms of what's important. And then the last thing I would say is consistency. So sometimes we invent new ways to do something. Well, if you have a good way of doing it, then just use that throughout, because then people can then transfer their knowledge from one part of the system to the other. So whenever we can kind of set something, think about the fact that this might be used in different contexts. How can I do it in a way that I'm going to be able to do it most consistently from one screen to another? That could be visual, could be the way something works, it could be selecting dates or something like that, right? We're going to use that same pattern over and over again. So for example, we go to all kinds of different yacht clubs, but they're all more or less the same in terms of how you park your boat. They might have different shapes, they might not all be in the same location, or the docks might be longer or shorter, but pretty much you dock your boat the same way on every one. So once you work out a way of presenting that information, use the same approach, because that will lend a sense of balance. When we're talking about balancing aesthetics and functionality, consistency will improve the aesthetics kind of for free, right? If you're consistent, then that's kind of already makes it feel more aesthetic. You don't really have to do anything extra for that. And we want to avoid this. This is Windows with every tab expanded. And instead, we kind of want to end up here, right? With just that balance of aesthetics and functionality. And the reason I really want to do this is because I feel like this is the best way for our clients to really gain the value of the investment that they make with us for custom software. We really want to benefit the most number of people and really kind of pay it forward and really have them get something really valuable out of what we build for them. And I think design really has the power to do that. So I encourage you all to learn more about aesthetics and just in design in general. If you're interested in reading, I have a few checklists and things that you can download, but I also have a workflow design reading list as well. So you can do a lot of reading about design. Most of it is geared towards the web world, but people are people, so all that's different is the platform, right? We're in FileMaker, so there's a couple of things that are different between the FileMaker design and the web in terms of implementation. But all of the things they talk about in terms of the way people read, the way that they perceive, the way we organize information, look for patterns and things, that's all the same no matter what the platform. So you can go ahead, and I've got a QR code there. You can go and download some of those if you'd like. I'll just leave that up for a second. And then also, last thing is I have a Facebook group. So if you'd like to join the Facebook group and hang out with us and talk about UI design, that would be wonderful. All right. Thank you so much today. I really appreciate it for being able to talk to you. Is there time for questions? Do we have time for questions? Okay, 2 minutes or 2 questions? Okay, any questions quickly? Any quick questions? Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, say again.
The increase of use of mobile devices like tablets and mobile devices, telephones. How does that affect your designing on desktop? Are you working from desktop back to the devices, the handheld devices, or the other way around from handheld devices towards your desktop?
I would say mostly people are working from desktop to mobile. That's just the more common thing. I don't think you necessarily have to do that, but I think that's just more, usually what happens is people have an established desktop system and they say, well, I have salespeople that are on the road and I want them to be able to create quotes or something. By definition, you usually have to strip things away in order to accommodate the mobile. Not always. You'll notice most mobile apps, like I can't think of an example right now, but there's some where you're like, there's certain things you can't do from the mobile app. Like if you want to like cancel your subscription or something, you have to go to the desktop app to do it. And that's usually because there's not as much space. And you have to, there's more remembering when you have a mobile device. If you do have a lot of functionality, sometimes things are just not as visible, so you have to kind of dig deeper down to find them. And so that's the kind of trade-off that you have to do. If you want to include everything that's on the desktop and put it into the mobile, then it's probably going to be, you won't be able to see as much on the surface because there's just not the real estate to put it. So you can either have extra menus where people can go and access that information, or you just decide there's certain things that are going to be excluded from the mobile and they're not going to be able to do it. So the example where you have somebody who wants to do quotes, well, maybe they can't do a full order on the mobile. They're just able to do that one thing, that quote, and that will then sync with the database when they get back to the office. Then they can do the rest of their process like that. Make sense?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
One more question?